Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, August 19th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the Fox News poll that has released numbers from the states of Arizona and Wisconsin. Now, both of these states are ones that have been polled either quite heavily or not, Arizona being the first. It has seen a number of polls, more specifically in the Senate race rather than in the governor's race. But as for the state of Wisconsin, it is quite exciting to see some numbers out of the state where you really just don't seem to see that much. Plainly put, Tony Evers, Mandela Barnes are seeing numbers that are similar to ones that we have seen in previous polls, but the last poll from the state of Wisconsin, I believe, might have been a few days ago, but prior to that, you're talking months. Some of these races haven't even been polled because there's a nominee that people didn't really expect at the beginning of the race. There are some races where, you're looking at it and it shows a different result than some other pollsters altogether. But Fox News, I think, deserves its own video on this sake because it is an A-rated pollster and it's one that has been providing us with data for quite some time now in a bunch of different swing states. Now, the numbers here are the most interesting part about it for very obvious reason. I mean, not just the numbers, but the margins are the ones that are truly just quite interesting because they defy expectation in some states where maybe it's going in a different direction than some people might be expecting. Now, we'll start off by taking a look at the state of Arizona. This is just simply because of alphabetical order, and also I want to spend a little bit more time talking about Wisconsin, considering that there hasn't been as many polls within the state. So to give you a summary and recap, what you can see on your screen right now is that Katie Hobbs, the Democratic nominee for governor in the state of Arizona, is ahead by 3 points. In the Senate race, the Democratic nominee for Senate, the incumbent Democrat Mark Kelly, is ahead by 8 points, a very big and clear drop-off between those two races. Now, the Arizona Senate race has been pretty solid, I would say, for the Democratic Party for quite some time. Not to say that it's a race that they can't lose, but rather that they definitely start out as the favorites. Mark Kelly won in 2020 by outperforming Biden. He was the second Democratic senator elected from the state for quite some time. You take a look at 2018, Kyrsten Sinema defeated the Republican nominee who but just so happened to be the same Republican nominee for 2020. So she won in 2018, Mark Kelly won in 2020, and now that we're going into 2022, the Republican Party actually nominated to someone who I would argue is worse for the general election. You have Blake Masters. You have someone who has been endorsed by President Trump, won his nomination over the statewide attorney general who won in a blue wave year. I mean, there was such a different direction, I should say, for the Senate race had a different nominee been chosen, but ultimately they weren't. And looking at the Arizona Senate race, it isn't just Fox News, but you also have numbers from other pollsters as well. This isn't the only poll that has been released for the state. In fact, I think there is a severe underrepresentation of the polls that have been taken within the state of Arizona. But on average, Mark Kelly actually leads by about 8 points statewide. That's down from what it was, about 10 points statewide. But 8 is the average, and 8 is what Fox News brought it to and what Fox News was pretty much centered around. Looking at the numbers that have been released recently, Mark Kelly has been up by a pretty significant amount. Against Blake Masters, in some cases, it's as narrow as 5 points, but in other cases, it's as large as 14. That's why the average resembles somewhere around Mark Kelly plus 8. That's good. That is a very good result for the Democratic Party, even to see the Democrats ahead in a state that should be going to the Republican Party. Joe Biden only won the state by 0.2%, so to have a Democrat outperforming where they were back in 2020 is quite impressive. The question is, are these polls accurate? And we will have to wait and see this upcoming November. As for the governor's race, the race is definitely a lot closer, at least as this poll describes. I'm not going to lie. I think that at this point in time, the numbers in the Arizona governor's race probably means, at least if this Fox News poll was to hold true and be tried and tested for a November deadline, probably means that the Republicans are actually very close to victory, if not in the victory spot right now in the governor's race. Now, allow me to explain. I think that the Fox News poll does consistently overestimate the Democratic Party, but what I will say is that sometimes there isn't enough margin of error in order for it to be that wrong. It would have to be a new level of wrong. And in midterm elections, such as 2018, some pollsters have been pretty accurate and looking at, yes, there have been inaccuracies with the Fox News pollster, but sometimes they've gotten races entirely spot on. For instance, the state of Georgia, they were literally within less than a half point of the actual results. Arizona, quite different, but again, polls aren't always going to be off by the same amount every election cycle. Take a look at 2016 versus 2020. Yes, some consistencies in terms of wrong states, but realistically, some of these polls were off by maybe 2, when in other situations in 4 years prior, they were off by 9 or 10. So just have to keep that in mind. But the governor's race, I say, a 3-point lead for the Democratic Party and a reduction from the Senate race means that not everyone is on board with electing Katie Hobbs, and more people are on board with electing Kari Lake, at least on the GOP side. Kari Lake receiving 44% of the vote, contrary to Blake Masters' 42% of the vote, means that there are voters out there that are willing to vote for Kelly that are also willing to vote for Kari Lake. Or at least, in the best case for Republicans, they're undecided in the Senate race, but willing to vote in the governor's race, both of which show a decrease in level of enthusiasm and support for Blake Masters. Good for Democrats on the national level, but there also are significant national implications of a Kari Lake candidacy and a victory in the state of Arizona. But it shows that Democrats haven't been able to capitalize on Kari Lake the way that they were able to on Blake Masters. It also helps that Mark Kelly is an incumbent and a popular one at that. So looking at the trajectory of these races, I think they're still very, very close. Katie Hobbs has about a 55% chance of victory in the state of Arizona, and it's actually a reduction. It was actually increasing to about 60%, and then it dipped as a result of this poll, because a 3-point lead is actually not that impressive. But in the Senate race, it pretty much reaffirmed our expectations for the race. Mark Kelly didn't really see this significant reduction in expectation from 72 to 70, nothing super significant. And at the end of the day, a 70% chance already for this Democratic senator is very, very impressive. An 8-point lead is not much that you can change or try to spin in favor of the opposition party that's down 8 points. And another thing that I would like to point out is the fact that looking at the results, you have 50% for Mark Kelly, but just 47 for Katie Hobbs. And as we know in election history, as we know in 2020, undecided voters almost always split for the GOP. The Democratic Party's vote share is typically very accurate. The Republicans, on the other hand, not so much. So when Mark Kelly is at 50 or even above 50 in the polls, that's good, because it means that at least, if that is the standard rule of thumb is true, Democrats will hold out, get to 50% win the state. But if they're at 47%, chances are, if November was today, you could very well see a result that's 52 to 48, with Katie Hobbs losing, despite her leading 3 points. Again, a lot of these undecideds are very possibly going to vote red, as they have in previous cycles. Moving on to the next state that I want to talk about, we have the state of Wisconsin. But to look at what has changed in terms of the trajectory of the generic ballot, Democrats actually now lead on Real Clear Politics for the first time. 538 had them leading about a week ago, but when you take a look at the numbers on the Real Clear Politics website, the lead actually never really came to fruition until as of recently. The Democrats now lead by 0.2% nationwide, according to Real Clear Politics. This is the first time this has happened on RCP since November of 2021. So it's been a long time coming, nearly a year later, and Democrats are doing it at exactly the right time. Just something to think about, which can explain the trajectory and the lead for Democrats in some of these states. Now, what I will say is the most surprising part about the numbers that we have seen thus far are the numbers from the state of Wisconsin. The ones that show Tony Evers, the Democrat, ahead of Tim Michels, the Republican. Now, you start off with a surface level good result for the Democrats, a 7-point lead for Marquette back in June, to a 2-point lead in August. Not, the numbers of change that you would like to expect for the Democrats, but still a lead regardless. Fox News has Tony Evers, the Democrat, ahead by 3 points, and the governor forecast in the state gives Tony Evers about a 66% chance at victory. But what I will say is that personally, at least, I am apprehensive about these numbers. I will also say that there are some red flags that should indicate, hey, the Democrats actually aren't ahead by as much as you might think. Democrats not being able to crack 50 with an incumbent is a worrying sign. Very similarly to Arizona, very similar to many other swing states, undecideds in these states are more than likely going to split red. And that's the problem. Tim Michels and Tony Evers are in a close and competitive race, and it's very similar and very reminiscent of what we saw in 2018. Wisconsin's governor race doesn't always listen to wave elections. Looking at Marquette, though, they were pretty accurate last time. They were off by 1 point, technically speaking, but realistically, well within their expected margin of error, and by the final result, they expected a tie. Tony Evers only won by 1.2%. Evers at different points had larger leads, 5 and a tie previously. It was a significantly underpolled race, but what it did tell us was that Marquette was only off by about 2 points. If it's off by about 2 points this time, Tony Evers loses. Fox News, on the other hand, doesn't really have much of a track record in the state of Wisconsin, but what I will say is that this 3-point lead isn't that impressive, but it is still surprising. If I was honestly expecting a result to be released from Fox News today, I would have predicted probably that the Republicans would have been ahead in the poll. I have had Republicans winning the governorship in the state of Wisconsin for a little bit. I think that you're still going to see a very close and competitive race, very similar to 2018. But we definitely need to see some more data that could show us otherwise. And the fact that Tony Evers, as an incumbent, hasn't cracked 50 is the alarming part. But the even more shocking part is that in the Senate race with a Republican incumbent, the Democrats are doing better. Mandela Barnes is the lieutenant governor across the state. He is someone who won the nomination after many other Democrats decided to drop out and practically hand him the nomination spot. And that's been very good for him because it's allowed him to clear the field and not have to focus on the primary that just recently occurred and rather immediately on the general election. And Mandela Barnes leads about 4 points according to Fox News, but Marquette's poll from just a few days ago shows Mandela Barnes ahead by 7 points. Now I get it. Wisconsin typically underestimates the results for Ron Johnson. It did it in 2010. It did it in 2016, and it very well could be doing it in 2022. I don't have Wisconsin as a blue state on my Senate map. But I will say that the fact that Mandela Barnes is able to get at 51% and 50% definitely should be a red flag for the GOP. Because unlike what we've seen in the Arizona gov race or the Wisconsin gov race, voters don't seem too committed to electing the Democrat to a point where they're putting them in the majority, but rather they're leaving a significant portion that are undecided. And again, history tells us they will break red. But in the Senate race in both the state of Arizona and Wisconsin, you're seeing a different story. But the reason why the Wisconsin race, at least, is the most shocking is because there's a Republican incumbent. Incumbency is typically the most powerful thing. If this was an open race, Ron Johnson would have a not as good of a chance at victory. Even though he's so unpopular, he seemed to have survived thus far by being an incumbent, not necessarily a popular one, and that's what's really pushed him across the finish line. Looking at the Senate forecast for the state of Wisconsin, you don't have the Democrats in the favorites, but Mandela Barnes still plays a pretty powerful role and is in a pretty powerful position in terms of a chance at victory across the state. And that poll seems to reflect that. Some would say it underestimates him. I would say that it probably puts him in a better position than he was maybe a week ago. But I won't say that I won't say that I'm going to change my characterization of the state of Wisconsin. At least not significantly. I think Wisconsin right now is still going to go to the GOP, and I honestly stand by that also in the governor's race. Even though 538 has pretty consistently given Tony Evers the high chance at victory, and you can actually see that chance at victory at one point was around 80%, which I never really bought, but it was something just to think about. But what I'm going to say is that the results here from these polls are not necessarily that impressive in the governor's race, but are impressive in the Senate race. And Democrats need to treat it as such. And honestly, that's exactly what we might be able to see from this midterm cycle. We have seen consistently that the Democratic Party has seen, at least in some cases pre-Dobbs, less of the vote than they did in 2020. For many people's expectations, including mine, 2022, for all purposes, was going to be a red wave year. Biden's approval rating was down. People were somewhat fine with Trump running again in 2024, and Republicans were shifting the generic ballot in favor of themselves for quite some time. Then the Democrats started to pull ahead, but one real thing came into the close and competitive column, and it wasn't the House. It was rather the U.S. Senate. The Senate seems to be moving in a direction where maybe you would expect to see this in 2018. To treat Democrats in a position where they have a very good opportunity at a pickup in Pennsylvania, potentially a pickup opportunity in the state of Wisconsin, where they're forcing Republicans to funnel money into Ohio, a Trump plus 8 state, forcing national Republicans, and this is very big, $28 million into a race that was never deemed to be competitive from the beginning, that became competitive because the Democrats put themselves in a powerful position. I mean, those are things that are very impressive, but ones that you would only expect to see in a year like 2018, certainly not 2022. But it seems to only be holding in the Senate because the numbers in the governorship, again, aren't that impressive, and they actually indicate that Democrats might be on track to lose those races, but they will also have severe national implications, but just not in the immediate effect, just more so in a presidential election. We'll see what happens. Right now, I would say that this Fox News poll has held a mixed bag for the Democratic Party, but it's definitely not as bad as it could have been. If this was truly going to be a red tsunami or a significant red wave, none of these numbers should have had the Democratic Party ahead, and the fact that they're leading in all 4 of them is quite impressive. But I would also say that definitely recognize and realize what may or may not be correct, and how some of these candidates are at 50% versus less than, and how undecideds in the past have typically broken in favor of the GOP. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 governor election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.